Who is going to be the Seattle quarterback starting in week 1 this year? That and so much more on tonight's episode of the Mailbag Show. Victoria, go ahead and start us off. Gino Smith or Drew Lock? Who is the guy going to be?
Oh gosh, I'm so happy we're starting with this question. It's been just jarring on me here. How are we gonna know? Are we gonna find out soon? This is gonna be a hot offense this year. Obviously, I'm just kidding. I hope they surprise us though. I hope Seattle surprises us. Now, Drew Lock or Gino Smith? Well, we've been hearing reports recently that Gino kind of has the upper hand in training camp so far, but it seems like it's not as far apart as we kind of thought. You know, we've seen who Drew Lock is, we've seen who Gino Smith is for the most part. I think we know who these guys are at this point, and they're not great, Bob. So Gino seems poised to win this job. The thing that's getting in Drew Lock's way, they were going to give him the start this week for this week's preseason game. He ended up testing positive for COVID a day or two ago. So Gino's going to start this week again. That's going to kind of put Lock in a tough spot, not being able to showcase his stuff. Hopefully he gets that third game in. But it seems like Gino's going to win out this job, and he knows he was in the system for the last couple of years. He knows this offense. He performed okay last year in Russell Wilson's absence. And honestly, I don't know if we're going to hit on the playmakers and the aspect of who is better for DK Metcalf, Rashad Penny, Tyler Lockett. I think it's Gino. I did put a tweet out, I think it was last week. I think DK Metcalf's being undervalued because everyone's so scared of how putrid this offense might be. But he played 3 games in 1 quarter last year with Gino Smith. He had 17 receptions, 251 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And this guy's going in the 4th or 5th round right now, as opposed to where he's gone the last couple of years as a top wideout. So I'm buying that dip. I really like that. And I just don't – I did look into Drew Lock's stats and just where his receivers ended the year in 2020 when he had the largest sample size we've got so far. Tim Patrick was wide receiver 39, 7.4 points per game. Jerry Jeudy not far behind there, 6.6 points per game. I hope it's Gino is what I'm pointing to, and I think it will be when all is said and done.
Gino ran a pretty competent offense last year. I mean, he didn't look bad by any means, and I think Drew Lock – you can make an argument that Drew Lock might benefit DK Metcalf a little bit just because he doesn't shy away from throwing those contested catches. But like you said, I don't like talking too much about my own leagues because, it's boring for other listeners to listen to. But I was in a draft yesterday, 14 teams, and I got DK Metcalf in the 5th round. I mean, it's wild. Like, this guy is still a young, unbelievable talent. He's got some flaws and he might have some questions with his quarterback play, but I agree that I think that we have just gone way too far to one end of the spectrum if he's getting pushed that far down draft boards. But Jeff, question to you. Who do you think is going to win this starting job? Do you think it's going to be Gino Smith? Do you think it's going to be Drew Lock? Do you not have any idea? How do you think this affects the playmakers there? Let us know what you think.
Well, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't sometimes. And I think that Pete Carroll, I don't know if trust is the right word, but I do think that Pete Carroll probably has an unrealistic expectation on what the Seattle Seahawks can be this year. And I think he knows Gino Smith. And last year Gino looks pretty good for what we had come to expect from Gino Smith last year when he did play. I expect Gino Smith will start the season. And we have got some clarity on this offense because it seems like Ken Walker will be missing at least part of the beginning of the season from what we know. So I think the Seahawks will go with Gino Smith, the player that they know. When it comes down to the weapons, we saw him target DK Metcalf pretty heavily. And so I expect they will be playing from behind, although I think that they will try very hard, just like when they had Russell Wilson, to go with a run-heavy offense. And so it's really hard to read. And I think that maybe Rashad Penny might be the play in this offense out of anybody, but I do worry about them playing from behind. If they do that, I think that DK Metcalf is a better play than where he's kind of landing. And Dave, I'm in a similar situation. I've grabbed him in a couple places in redraft leagues where I see him falling into that 5th, 6th, even 7th round sometimes, because I think it's worth the play. And I expect the Seahawks to be playing from behind. I think Gino Smith is somewhat competent, able to keep them on schedule, and I think that that's really what Pete Carroll is looking for out of that quarterback position. That's essentially how he used Russell Wilson really the last couple of years, to try to keep them on schedule, try to keep them in ball games. I do think that we will get to some point where they are just really out of it and they need to give Drew Lock a chance just to see what they have there. That's my expectation. I don't know that Geno Smith is necessarily a play in maybe a super deep super flex league. Other than that, he's just kind of going to be one of those quarterbacks that you might get to buys by the time he's out of that job, but they will see what Drew Lock has at some point. But I think that this is prime for maybe a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young to be leading this team in 2023.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about how these guys can possibly affect DK Metcalf, but we haven't talked that much about Tyler Lockett. And Tyler Lockett actually saw a higher target share with Geno Smith than he did with Russell Wilson. And what you're going to lose if Geno Smith is the starting quarterback is obviously Geno Smith is not going to be throwing the ball 55 yards downfield and putting it right in the breadbasket for Tyler Lockett. But Tyler Lockett has kind of evolved as a wide receiver over the last few years. He isn't just that burner downfield anymore. He has that in his game, but really he is a technician as a route runner. He's able to find those really soft pockets in the zone, and I think he can kind of be the safety blanket for Geno Smith. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit if we look back and say, why did we let Tyler Lockett slide as far as he did in the drafts when he finishes with 150, 160 targets next year? I think that's well within his range of outcomes, and I think that Geno Smith would be a pretty solid quarterback for Tyler Lockett to play with. But we have a ton to talk about on tonight's episode of the Mailbag Show. Just a reminder, if you are in the live chat right now on Twitter, we can't see you. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, we can see those comments coming through. So drop your comments in the live chat, and we will get to those at the end of the show after we hit all of the pre-submitted questions. Before we get into that, though, just want to remind everybody that if you have not already, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube page at youtube.com/footballguys. You'll be able to find all of our content there, or all of our video content there, our short videos, as well as all of our live shows, youtube.com/footballguys. So be sure to check that out. Now let's go ahead and just dive right in because we have a lot of great questions. And this one comes in from Twitter. Dynasty Deviant is asking us, Josh McDaniels has historically had love for the slot. Why is the general consensus that Hunter Renfrow is in a bad spot, barring injury to Adams or Waller? And I love this question because we have seen Wes Welker and Julian Edelman and even Jacoby Myers last year, guys just feasting out of the slot. So Jeff, start us off here with this question.
I love Hunter Renfrow this year. He's actually my most rostered wide receiver on Underdog, believe it or not, because where he's landing, I think he's a great play, especially in that format, playing him in that best ball format. Why is he behind? Well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory why he's behind Devonta Adams. Darren Waller is the one that I'm a little bit concerned about because we saw him phase out of this offense a little bit last year. And if they're using Hunter Renfrow in that slot in this offense that really relies on it, plus the familiarity with Derek Carr and Devonta Adams going back to college, I think that Devonta Adams is going to see plenty of targets from Derek Carr. Darren Waller feels like he could be the odd man out. And I think that we see that a little bit in kind of where rankings are landing. And if Darren Waller weren't a tight end and getting that premium, we would probably be seeing that a lot bit. And we'd probably see Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller a little bit closer. But that's really your explanation. Having that tight end eligibility, having that need at that position, that's really why Darren Waller is sitting ahead of Hunter Renfrow. I would not be surprised at all if Hunter Renfrow out targets Darren Waller by a good margin. And I'm a little bit skeptical on Darren Waller paying off even at the ADP because he didn't hit that last year. You know, he really struggled for most of last season, and where he was sitting in drafts, he was, you know, I saw him first round in plenty of drafts last year, and he's fallen back from that this year, but he's still kind of very aggressive. And that would feel like the odd man out at ADP, but I understand if you're desperate at tight end and you're swinging for upside, you kind of land there sometimes, but I do love Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Hunter Renfrow, it's like we have completely forgotten about this guy that he literally finished as a wide receiver 1 last year. Like he finished in the top 12 wide receivers, and I get that Devontae Adams is there, but he's still a young guy. He's a baller. I like it. So Victoria, same question to you. How are you feeling about Renfrow, Darren Waller, Devontae Adams? How do you think this kind of shakes out in Las Vegas?
I do love Renfrow. I think you've already mentioned this, Dave. I saw a lot of tweets showing that McDaniel's top slot receiver, they got more targets than the outside receiver in certain schemes or seasons. And we obviously have to account for coaching history when we have a large sample size like this. But I can't personally compare Moss and Welker to Devontae and Renfrow, though Hunter Renfrow is one of the most underrated route runners in the game. to be fair, he's one of my favorites. They're not bringing in Davante Adams for heaps of money and then getting their coach to say, I think I'm going to get Renfrow more targets. I did see that take on Twitter a couple of times, which was pretty hot and spicy. I think that Renfrow will have an opportunity to garner more targets based on, obviously, the team's best cornerbacks are going to constantly be blanketing Davante Adams. He's going to benefit from that. I think that what it is now is more so my personal opinion, and maybe the opinion of others, is that Hunter Renfrow's ADP is pretty high for being potentially, I know, Jeff, you didn't agree with this. You think Waller's the odd man out. Potentially, if it's Renfrow as the odd man out, as the third target on this team, he's going at wide receiver 34. He's going around guys like Bateman, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Devontae Smith, Alan Lazard. I think those guys, you can see the path to potentially being the wide receiver one on their team. Besides Devontae Smith, I know AJ Brown will be there, but the rest of the guys, I can make an argument for taking those guys over Renfrow depending on my team build. So I think I'm more off of him due to that higher ADP. Love the talent, hate the cost.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. Now, we have a ton of questions on tonight's show, so let's just go ahead and dive right into the next one.
It's time for the question of the week, powered by Sleeper.
We have a really exciting opportunity here where we are going to be working hand in hand with Sleeper. You'll be able to find our podcast on their app going forward. And this week's question is brought to us regarding Rondale Moore. And we're going to talk a little bit about his ADP on Sleeper. So Patrick Bailey is saying, is the Rondale Moore hype real? He burned me last year and I am skeptical. I'm looking at Sleeper's ADP right now where he's getting drafted as 137.8, which still seems like it's pretty low. I mean, he's getting drafted in the 13th, 14th round of your draft, but he is shooting up draft boards recently. So Victoria, go ahead and start us off here. Are we getting excited about Rondale Moore? I mean, he burned us last year after getting a ton of hype as a rookie. We know he's undersized, didn't really get the role that we had wanted his rookie season, but how are we feeling about him in year two?
I'm still feeling a little skeptical, though the reports coming out of camp are pretty good. I read something today from Albert Breer. Says Rondale Moore is going to be a big figure in filling the void left by Christian Kirk. And obviously with DeAndre Hopkins out for the first 6 games as he's suspended, he's had an awesome camp. He said his play strength was already impressive. He's always been able to run, and he senses that the coaches are going to do everything they can to get the ball in his hands. So we got to like that report. The only thing, last year I was thinking about this, the Cardinals, they rushed the ball at the 7th highest clip in the league, and they were 18th in passing. So that's where I kind of worry. I'm not saying they're going to go with that same scheme, but, you know, you've got Hopkins out. You might go with a more run-heavy approach for that first few games of the season. And so I see this offense kind of going through James Conner, going through Hollywood for those first couple of games, and then Rondale's kind of that third piece that I see getting a piece of the pie. So at the price that you mentioned, though, Dave, it's kind of a no-brainer. You're looking for guys at that point in your draft with high upside. So I'm not off of Rondale at all at that price. I think it's just that we have yet to see that upside. We've been dying to see that he had in college from that tape. We just haven't seen that him ball out like that yet.
Yeah, and we're talking Sleeper ADP right now, and it's so important to know the ADP on the platforms that you're playing. And I'm looking at some of the other guys that are getting drafted near Rondale Moore right now on Sleeper, and some of the receivers that are adjacent in value, I just can't wrap my mind around. Christian Watson is a guy, sure, he's got a wide open depth chart, but he was just activated off PUP. This guy's going to be hitting week 1 with about 2 weeks of practice under his belt and almost no rapport with Aaron Rodgers, who was notorious for waiting to develop that rapport. We're looking at Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who's going to be a boomer bust guy for the Chiefs that I can't really get behind all that much. Jahan Dotson is another guy that is adjacent to Rondale Moore in value, or I would prefer Rondale Moore. I can't help but feel like the narrative around Rondale Moore is that he is a bust after one bad season. But really what I'm seeing when I was looking at the numbers today, it kind of reminds me of Deebo Samuel last year. And I'm almost afraid to say this because I don't want to set the bar that high. But, the kind of narrative that you hear surrounding Rondale Moore, he's a low ADOT guy. He's a gadget player. He's an extension of the run game. He can only win when you manufacture touches for him. That's exactly what we heard about Deebo Samuel for the first 2 years of his career. And then he stepped up and was a bona fide wide receiver one last year. So I'm not saying that every single player who has a low ADOT and a high YAC is going to turn into that type of player, but it is possible that Rondale Moore can develop into a much better player. I mean, all you got to do is go back and look at the tape from when he was 18 years old, just dominating the Big Ten as a freshman. I mean, he's a phenomenal football player, and they're going to have to find ways to get the ball in his hands. Jeff, how are you feeling about Rondale?
So I think people need to realize and they need to understand that in his last 2 years of college, he only played 7 games between those 2 seasons. The first 2020 was the COVID season. He only played 3 games that year, and he had an injury the year before that, only 4 games. And so when I saw Rondale Moore play last year, I mean, what do I know? I'm just a random guy watching tape, but he looked very hesitant when I was watching him play last year. He looked like he just wasn't adjusted to the speed of the game. And if you think about it, if he missed a good chunk of his last couple of years in college, that's a dramatic step up in talent to go to a live NFL field as kind of you're getting your sea legs underneath you, plus adjusting to that speed. The stories out of camp is all that aggression is back, that he's ready to go, that he's feeling much more comfortable at the NFL level. I expect he's going to take off. And Dave, I think you make a great point that using him out of the backfield a little bit in that passing game, moving him around the field, I expect they get a little bit more creative usage. Even before we saw whatever, I'm not sure if Hollywood Brown is heading for a suspension or not. I don't know where that stands on that with the criminal speeding, whatever was involved in that. But even before that, Cliff Kingsbury has mentioned Rondale Moore every opportunity he's gotten. Mm-hmm. So James Conner was hardly used in the passing game last year, except for when Chase Edmonds was out of the lineup. Only 39 targets on the season, and that was really funneled into those couple games that Edmonds was gone. I expect, I don't know, I wrote a James Conner spotlight, and my expectation on that was that he would see kind of the same role that we saw last year. Very heavy usage in the run game, just like Victoria mentioned. But I think that they could give some of that slot work that Christian Kirk departed, and he left that open. I think Rondale Moore picks up some of that. I think he picks up some of the backfield work for Chase Edmonds. And don't forget, he was involved in the offense last year at times. And so there are several different areas that he can come in and contribute. But I think you made the best point when you talk about other available options at his ADP. And it's really, really questionable there. Whereas I can step into a guy that we absolutely loved last year coming into the season in an offense that we really like. And I think that that's a great pivot there because we're going to have open targets regardless of what happens when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, when Hollywood Brown, whatever happens in that situation. And I love Rondale Moore this year.
Yeah. And, you talk about the Christian Kirk role being vacated and how he could step into that. What about the Chase Edmonds role? I mean, we saw Deebo Samuel, who is kind of a similar player to Rondale Moore, where you just want to get the ball in his hands and he can do a lot of things. Once he gets in space, he can break tackles, he can run between the tackles, he can run on the outside, he can kind of do it all. So we talk about, Chase Edmonds now having this role vacated where I think personally Rondale Moore could fit very well into that. He can catch the ball out of the backfield and do those special things. So I think the one guy looking at Sleeper's ADP, I think there's only one guy that really is probably a tough decision for me, and that's George Pickens, who's getting drafted at 147.9. I expect him to start climbing up draft boards a little bit as we get more and more hype out of camp from him. But those are two guys when I'm at that point in my draft in the 13th or 14th round. I'm probably even looking a couple rounds before ADP. Rondale Moore and George Pickens are the two guys near that cost on Sleeper that I'm really trying to lock in as early as I can. And if you haven't already, be sure to download Sleeper. You can get the download link is in the description on YouTube. Just a phenomenal platform that you can use to play fantasy football. They have so many options and customability features, and they're going to be rolling out 22 new features this year and even more in season. The thing I like best about Sleeper is how they take feedback and instantly implement it. I mean, you can at these guys on Twitter and say, hey, I want to see this. And 24 hours later, they will update it on their app. Just an absolutely great company. And we are thrilled to be partnering with them through the rest of the 2022 season. Now let's go ahead and dive back into some other questions that we got here. And the next one comes in from Sam Wagman, our own at Footballguys. And Sam is asking us, where is the optimal place to draft uncertain players like DK Metcalf and Antonio Gibson, whose values could differ depending on who you talk to? Victoria, start us off here. I mean, these are two guys that are sliding way below ADP. We already talked about DK Metcalf a little bit. Antonio Gibson, your honey, baby, boo-boo, sweetie pie, whatever. He is flying down draft boards as well. I'm getting him in the 10th round of my drafts. Where are you taking these guys?
Man, I think Gibson might be free in the next couple weeks if anything else happens. These reports coming out, he's just like the butt of every fantasy joke this week. They're saying, "Oh, I saw him washing Ron Rivera's car," I think, the other day. Like, he's just being relegated to, he's taking special team snaps. He's with the punt returners. He's with
Today
the
after
third
practice, he was
string.
actually massaging Brian Robinson's calves because he had a little knot in his calves, and that's what Antonio Gibson's actually doing now in Washington.
Oh my gosh, the catastrophic reactions to the preseason game. Now, if you don't know, I'm sure you know by now if you've been on Twitter, but the preseason game from last weekend, I think it was his second carry. Antonio Gibson fumbled deep into the other team's territory, lost the ball, etc. He had a fumbling issue last year. I think he had 6 or 7 fumbles total, highest in the league. It's been a problem. He said he'd been working on it in the offseason. And then that happens. And then Brian Robinson came out, finished the next drive. Antonio Gibson came back out with Taylor Heineke in the 2s the next series. I mean, it was scary and ugly, and everyone's reactions have been crazy. So if that continues to drive down Gibson's ADP to a point where you're just, it's going to be ridiculous. You know what I mean? I mean, you can't expect him to be relegated to the bench from that one fumble. I think Ron Rivera is just an old school coach. Dave, you mentioned that before in our chat. I just think this is punishment for Gibson and saying, figure it out or this will be your future. So, but if that's causing him to just fall, I mean, I'm taking him anywhere from, I don't know. I guess I'd be comfortable fine if he keeps falling anywhere from the 7th to the 10th. Like if he's going in the 10th and 11th, I mean, come on. You got a guy that's going to still get most of the early down work. Sure, McKissick's still going to come in. This has been the narrative the last 2 seasons, and he still finished as an RB1. I'm not saying he will this season, but for how far he may fall, if he falls into that running back 28 or 30 range or 32, 35, I mean, that's just ridiculous value. I'm personally still grabbing him at that kind of price. We've already hit on a guy like DK Metcalf. I think he's being undervalued severely right now. I'm comfortable taking DK where he's going in the 4th or 5th right now.
Yeah, I mean, with both of these guys, they certainly have some situations that can, concern you a little bit, but they're talented players. And I say this all the time, you're not going to regret betting on talent. And that's what these guys are. It's kind of wild how far Antonio Gibson is getting pushed now when you're doing these drafts. You see him going in like the handcuff range. Like when people are drafting like
Right.
Alexander Madison and Isaiah Spiller, then it's like, oh, we should take Antonio Gibson too. Antonio Gibson, even with a healthy Brian Robinson, is probably going to see a minimum 175, 200 carries this year. I mean, that still is probably what you can project for Antonio Gibson. And then we're talking about, him getting drafted near handcuffs. He's going to get that work if everybody else is healthy. Let's say something happens to J.D. McKissick or Brian Robinson. One of those guys goes down. Then Antonio Gibson is right back in the same role that has produced back-to-back RB1 numbers for him. So, yeah, I think that we've all gotten a little bit too crazy with the Antonio Gibson slander. He's not a guy that I was targeting earlier in the offseason, but now with where his value is, I cannot stop drafting him. Jeff, I think you have a slightly different take on Antonio Gibson. Maybe? I don't know. Let's hear. What do you got to say about him?
I do have a slightly different take. And I think that you have to listen to what the coaching staff is telling you. And if the coaching staff is telling you that they are concerned about his conversion, because that's the thing that we need to remember. And that's the thing that we were excited about, that he was a college wide receiver and he's converting and he's big, strong, and fast. And he's caught the ball in the past. And he could be Christian McCaffrey because Ron Rivera said that one time 2 years ago. Now they go out in day 2 and they add Brian Robinson. And the thing with Brian Robinson is not an exciting football player, but Brian Robinson is a very solid football player. And if the coaching staff can trust him on things like blitz pickup, on ball security, you're going to start to see him get very valuable work. You're going to see him start to get that goal line work. You're going to start to see him in more passing downs. And you're going to see Antonio Gibson kind of shift more towards, we trust you a little bit more on first down, maybe second down, and then we're going to kind of play J.D. McKissick and Brian Robinson in our money downs. So if you get into a situation where, I don't think any of us really expect the Washington offense to be particularly good, but, maybe you do, but I don't really expect a whole lot of goal line opportunity. But if that's going to Brian Robinson and passing game work is going to J.D. McKissick and Brian Robinson is seeing some of those snaps, sure, you might get some action from Antonio Gibson. Maybe he gives you 10 carries, 45 yards. What do you got? You got 4.5 points. And so that's where it's kind of one of those things. It's just a very, very risky bet for me because Brian Robinson will have a role. We can't sit here and say that he's not going to have any sort of role, that Antonio Gibson is just this stud, because we've been waiting and waiting. We waited a year. We said, well, if Antonio Gibson gets work share, what is he going to look like? He was 4th in the NFL in rushes last year, and he ended up finishing running back 18 in points per game. And so I don't know. We've kind of seen what we wanted to see out of Antonio Gibson. We wanted to see him get work. He did, and he was kind of a high-end running back too. So really, what are you stepping into here? It's just a very, very risky play. That the downside is he's just a guy you can't put in your lineup because of this very crowded backfield on this offense that we don't think is particularly good. Whereas the upside on it is running back, a high-end RB2. It's just one of those, I don't know. I think it's a risky play for that. And I think DK Metcalf is a different conversation entirely. I think that you're going to see, I think we trust pretty well his usage there. I mean, sure, maybe they're going to try to run the ball, but at some point they're going to have to throw it. So I think it's two different conversations there. But again, Antonio Gibson's a guy that makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah, and I mean, you're drafting him as, a middle and RB3 right now. So even if he is putting up that high-end RB2 upside that we've seen, he's definitely paying off at ADP, and he's somebody that you can be pretty excited about drafting. But the other thing is, like you said, he just converted to running back 2 years ago, played wide receiver in college. Even if they were to convert him back and say, hey, let's see what you can do as a wide receiver, this is a Carson Wentz-led offense that's got a pretty crowded wide receiver room with Terry McLaurin there, Jahan Dotson, and then you think maybe he can find some sort of hybrid role, but we forget because he didn't play last year, Curtis Samuel already kind of has that hybrid role where he can do things out of the backfield in the slot and out wide and all over the place. So there are a lot of playmakers on this team that might not score a lot of points. You can make a solid case for Antonio Gibson either way, and I think you made some really good points there, Jeff, but man, we can talk about Antonio Gibson all day with the way that, his value has been changed these last couple of weeks. Let's move on to a different topic, though. And this one comes in from our friend Abe, DFS_Docket on Twitter. And Abe is asking us, how much does quarterback play affect your drafting of receivers? Guys like Deontay Johnson, DK Metcalf. This is just the DK Metcalf show, huh? Can somebody ask us a question that doesn't involve DK Metcalf? And Terry McLaurin, who we just talked about. Victoria, start us off here. How does quarterback play affect how you draft these players?
I think it has to affect you to a certain degree. Where you're taking them is probably the biggest thing that I'm always thinking of. So Terry McLaurin, for example, I don't believe Carson Wentz is this sincere upgrade from last year. But Terry's price this year is not nearly as high as it was last season. He had much higher expectations. So if he's falling, I'm fine. I'm taking a shot on him as my wide receiver too. Same with these other guys, DK and Deontay Johnson. I know there's a lot of skeptical people out there on Deontay Johnson, which is the narrative is very interesting to me on DJ because it's okay. Well, is Deontay still going to ball out without Ben? And it's, Ben only targeted him because he didn't have the arm, etc. But then it's Najee Harris's ADP is, running back 5 or something like that. He's still very, very high. You're still counting on that volume. I'm not as worried on DJ as a lot of other people. Depending on the Steelers should be throwing. Their quarterback play, I don't think it can get worse than last year. I mean, knock on wood over here, I guess. But they got to be throwing a lot, just like Ben did last year. So I'm not out on these guys. It just depends on their price. So if DK starts sneaking up draft boards, let's say, I don't think he'll be out there this week for preseason, but if he was for the third game or something and they have a good game with Gino, these guys' ADPs might rise a little bit. It all depends on the price. I'm not off of any of these guys because of their quarterback, I guess I would say. I think Terry is the one that scares me the most depending on his price.
And the thing is with Terry McLaurin, it's the whole theme of his career has been poor quarterback play. But it's not like he was doing what Allen Robinson did with poor quarterback play and putting up 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns and back-to-back wide receiver numbers. You look at his season-end finishes, he was the wide receiver 29 as a rookie. His best season ever was in 2020 when he was a wide receiver 20. And then last year, he finished as the wide receiver 25. And here we are now drafting him as wide receiver 19. At what point are we just going to say, hey, maybe Terry McLaurin isn't going to be that top 5 receiver we want him to be. Maybe he is just a wide receiver too. And time again, it seems like this is the third offseason in a row now where Terry McLaurin is garnering all this hype. And I think that we just, as a whole industry, need to reshape the way that we're looking at him because sure, Carson Wentz was able to turn Michael Pittman into a wide receiver 1. maybe I'm crazy here, but I just think that Pittman is a well-rounded, better all-around receiver than Terry McLaurin is. But Jeff, talking about these guys, Deontay Johnson, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, are you concerned about their quarterback play, and does that affect how you draft them?
Well, it's really baked into their ADP already. So that concern has kind of been addressed. I think what you're buying here, you're buying a wide receiver too. And that's the reality. You're not really, the thing of it is they might see volume enough to push to that wide receiver one, but the efficiency on the quarterback play is going to knock it back down a little bit. And so I think that you're placing that bet kind of where their ADP lies. It's either these players that you're stepping into wide receiver 2 production, or you're buying an ambiguous wide receiver room, like maybe the Denver wide receiver room, where you're buying Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, those type of guys, and you're not entirely sure which direction the production is going to go. And so it's kind of 6 to 1, half a dozen the other. You're playing risk either way. And so I don't have a problem drafting these guys, because I think the volume is going to be there. And that's really what I'm ultimately looking for, especially in wide receiver. I'm looking for high volume wide receivers that are going to step into, and I'm really hunting for 30-point weeks out of my wide receivers. And I think that these guys are capable of doing that, because you get those types of weeks. I don't know. I see a lot of people that are like, well, he's going to give you 11 PPR points. And I mean, that's great, but I'm looking for 30-point weeks that are going to win me weeks and move on. And yeah, maybe there's a floor of 5-point weeks, but is there really a big difference between an 11-point week and a 5-point week in your PPR lineups versus getting those 30-point weeks that swing leagues and swing you different weeks? And so I think they're capable of that. It's just that you're going to be a lot less consistent on that and a lot fewer of those. And so that's kind of where I land on them, and my willingness to draft them versus a wide receiver that might be in an ambiguous situation and we don't know where they're going to end up. It's really 6 1, half dozen the other. You're playing risk either way.
Now, do you think Deontay Johnson still has that type of weekly upside with Trubisky or Pickett or whoever it may be? Because I see that with DK Metcalf and Terry McLaurin. They could have those big boom weeks, but I think Deontay Johnson, who is getting drafted above all of these guys, is the one that concerns me the most, because he isn't that big play guy. He isn't somebody that can just, run through an entire defense. He was such a product of getting a high target share from Big Ben and his waning arm strength that I don't know if Deontay Johnson has that. He seems like a guy who is going to finish the year with, a 12-point floor and a 16-point ceiling, and you're not going to see too many games outside of that.
Well, that's where the real question lies on this offense. On, is it this receiver role in this offense? He's kind of in the Antonio Brown role, where so much of the production was funneled to this one wide receiver position, or is it Ben Roethlisberger? And that's where, we don't really have that answer. Is it Ben Roethlisberger? Is it the offense? Is the offense going to use him in that role like we saw previously? Or was it Ben's reliance on just going to this one wide receiver and over again? But you are exactly right that he doesn't have that ability. The other two guys, they can score you a 65-yard touchdown and have one play where they're hitting 15 points, and then you're just kind of stacking on top of that. And so, yeah, Deontay Johnson does not have that. He makes me concerned. And if what we're hearing about George Pickens is true at all, they have Chase Claypool still there. They have Pat Freiermuth emerging, and this offense, I don't think, is going to be particularly good. They have out of the quarterback position, so that I think is a concern. But if it is this role, and we certainly saw them give them money, and if you're one of these people that you're going to play with the money and you're kind of going to go that direction, they did pay Deontay Johnson to be that prime alpha wide receiver within this room.
That's what makes me more comfortable as well. That's what I was going to mention. Just slightly more comfortable with that 2-year contract.
Yeah. But I got to say, we saw the contracts for Mclaurin and DK and Debo and AJ Brown. I mean, everybody from that draft class got paid big this year. And Deontay Johnson had the lowest salary per year and only got a 2-year deal. So he got the smallest salary out of all of those guys. I mean, he really got wide receiver 2 money. And I think this conversation that we're having right now transitions us pretty well into our next question, which comes in from the Joey Wright. Oh, hi. How you doing, Joey? He says, after an eventful NFL preseason week, who is a player we are all excited about, and why is it George Pickens? Victoria, I mean, this guy
roll the
recorded
tape.
a video. You're already on youtube.com/footballguys. Go ahead and check out the short I dropped earlier this morning talking about late round wide receivers to target, and I was talking about George Pickens. But Victoria, go ahead and talk to us a little bit about him.
You got to roll that tape of the preseason game from this last weekend. If you didn't see it, this guy reels in a pass in the end zone, and he just toe taps in the tiniest little back end corner. It was actually insane. I loved it. I think going off of the conversation we just had, I think we saw Claypool as this hyped rookie as well when he came in, and then we kind of tapered off. Of course, we're going to see Pickens make those big plays. We're going to see him have a couple of boom weeks. I just don't know. I don't want to set the expectation that you see that one preseason game and you're like, okay, he might usurp Deontay Johnson for the one or that kind of thing. I am so excited to see what he does this year. Don't get me wrong. But that was just an amazing play. In terms of the volume, though, I still think he could be third or fourth on the pecking chart. It depends on what they're doing with Claypool, though. I mean, Jeff already mentioned their playmakers, their wide receiver room, their pass catching room is great still. I mean, there's a lot of guys there to compete with for targets.
We haven't even talked about Freiermuth or Najee yet, who are good man targets as well.
Exactly. That's the thing. You forget about Najee Harris. He had, how many targets last year?
93 targets, the rookie record.
Man is a beast. So you gotta, of course, we're excited. I think his ADP might shoot up from this last game if he continues to ball out in preseason. I just think it might get a little rich for my liking. Are we hitting on other players based off of this question, or are we just gonna stick with George?
We're just gonna hype up George Pickens. Was there anyone else that jumped out to you? I mean, Treston Ebner, you look pretty good in Chicago.
Right, totally, yeah.
Brian Robinson, can we talk about him again?
Brian Robinson.
Before we mentioned Isaiah Pacheco.
Pacheco, no. Yeah, I'm surprised we didn't get 100 questions about Isaiah Pacheco.
Me too.
I don't know if you guys watched the stream that I did last night for the Sleeper Bowl draft, but Matt Kelly, the Podfather over at Player Profiler, took Pacheco. It was either the 8th or the 9th round. I mean, this guy is flying up draft boards, and we were all razzing him for it. And then JJ Zacharyson said, well, if he didn't take him there, I was going to. So, I mean, people are going wild over Pacheco right now.
I love it. No, I mean, no one else crazy stood out. I think Dameon Pierce was great. I thought Sam Howell, when he came in, was very interesting. I think there's a chance he might outplay Carson Wentz at some point this season. I would not be shocked to see that. But yeah,
what about Malik Willis? I mean, as advertised, this man had a crazy scramble for a touchdown, and then he just unloaded that bazooka arm for a huge pass downfield. I mean, he had some not so great plays as well, but we saw the rushing upside and we saw the big arm from Malik Willis. So this time of year is fun, finally getting to, see these guys on an NFL field. But Jeff, why don't you talk to us a little bit? Anybody you're excited about, or you want to talk about George Pickens? How do you want to look at this question?
I'll talk about George Pickens. I think it's very, very exciting because he brings a different element to that Pittsburgh room, and they tried to use Chase Claypool as that vertical threat. I'm not sure if that's really the best area of the field to use Chase Claypool, given his physicality. I almost feel like he's more of an undersized tight end if they get a little bit more creative with that usage.
Big slot,
and they can use Pickens to attack vertically. My concern is that, yes, there are a lot of highlights in training camp, but when we get into the season, is this going to be an offense that's able to push the ball down the field? Because, Ben Roethlisberger is gone. I don't know. I mean, Dave knows better than anybody, but is Mitch Trubisky somebody that's going to threaten the field vertically to hit George Pickens? I don't think Kenny Pickett is that type of player. And if, God forbid, it's Mason Rudolph, I don't think he's that type of player either. So this might be one of those that he excites in moments and you might get a highlight reel out of it, but you can't actually put him into your lineup. And that would be my concern on this play. This is one of those that there is so much talent in this Steelers between the running backs and the wide receivers that either we're going to get a shock out of the quarterback position in fantasy or we're going to get disappointed across the board.
And what I'll do real quickly before we move off of this question is just kind of paint the picture for George Pickens' upside. For those that are unaware, you got a lot of people that are just tuning in right now that aren't plugged into the NFL draft and, talking football every single day during the offseason. George Pickens is a guy that was projected by a lot of scouts to be, a top 3 wide receiver pick in this draft that was pretty loaded with guys like, Drake London and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. George Pickens could have been one of those guys. The reason he was pushed down was for character concerns. And it's not so much off the field stuff. Like this guy doesn't have, a long rap sheet or failed drug test or anything like that. It's all on the field stuff. He'd be blocking a player and 50 feet out of bounds, pushing him all the way through the bench. And there was another one where, an opponent slid in front of him on the sidelines and he squirted him in the face with a water bottle. And we've seen him block guys, pancaking them when they aren't looking on a blindside block. So his problems come from being hyper competitive on the field. And we're already hearing about that in camp where he's, making a catch over Cam Sutton and then doing the gritty on him while he's laying on his back and, he's jawing at players. And that's just the type of player that he is. And these are the types of players that the Pittsburgh Steelers have targeted. I mean, Martavis Bryant, Chase Claypool, Antonio Brown. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. So George Pickens, and again, I'm not addressing the risk here at all because I love George Pickens, but his ceiling is as high as any wide receiver in this draft class. I mean, he's got the build to be a true alpha. We didn't even really see what he can do last year because he tore his ACL before the college football season started. We saw a very small sample size at the end of his sophomore year where he looked like the most dominant wide receiver in the NCAA. I mean, he's just an absolute beast, and I can't wait to see what he does in the pros. Next question comes in from Ahan, who I had the pleasure of meeting just last weekend in Canton. Just such a friendly guy. Ahan, thank you so much for being a friend of the show. Glad you were able to make it to Canton and glad we were able to meet last weekend. But Ahan asks us, why is Chase being ranked ahead of Diggs in redraft? Diggs has less target competition, a better quarterback, and had a better true catch rate in 2021. Who wants to start this one? This is a great question. I feel like we could finish the show talking about this for the next 20 minutes, but who wants to take this one?
Right. This is a great question. I could go first. Jeff probably has a nice segment planned for us. I think, and especially this will be good for Jeff and I to answer too. We are token Bills fans. So know that first and foremost. I think with Jamar Chase, sure, he is drafted above Diggs in most places. And Diggs is a fantastic receiver. I think that insane sheer upside of the games we saw last year with Jamar Chase that he put up, those week winning games, those crazy amount of points at a 50, 60, insane amount of points. That's not what Diggs does for the most part. Diggs is that consistent player that you can rely on week in and week out to give you a solid amount of points. And I just think that you're looking for that crazy upside when you're going for your wide receiver one in drafts. Personally, I am. So I would be taking Chase over Diggs, even though this all is very true, and I believe that. I think even sure, Josh Allen's, I'd say, a better quarterback than Joe Burrow, but how much? And how much does that even matter? For fantasy, I mean, of course, in real life, yes, but for fantasy, Burrow is perfectly capable, and he proved it last year of putting the ball in Chase's hands and having him have big weeks. So this other stuff, yes, while it is true, less target competition for Diggs, he's the obvious alpha wide receiver there. Chase has a lot more competition, but they're throwing the ball plenty to push that ball around and get everyone to have that value. So it's just that crazy upside that you're looking at, in my opinion.
And I'll talk about Chase a little bit because I just wrote an article on him, and Chase was a guy that I didn't really understand either. I was like, why is this guy just consistently going top 5? You look at his volume last year, and the volume really wasn't there. I mean, on a per game basis, T. Higgins was seeing more targets per game and more yards per game. But like you said, what it is with Chase is just the upside. I mean, overall, as far as fantasy points go for rookie wide receivers, there's only one receiver in NFL history who scored more points as a rookie than Jamar Chase, and it's Randy Moss. And we know what Randy Moss did, became one of the best wide receivers in NFL history. So I see there's kind of a few different outcomes for Chase, but regardless of what outcome he hits, he is still going to put up, almost guaranteed to put up wide receiver one numbers, barring injury, of course. But the most common thing that happens when a guy puts up his type of production as a rookie is they see a very sizable target share increase going into year 2. If he's able to see that increase in target share, like we saw Justin Jefferson do from year 1 to year 2, and if he's able to maintain his efficiency, he will put up Cooper Kupp-esque numbers, like what Cooper Kupp did last year. That is within his range of outcomes. So that's what it is with Chase, is you're drafting him not hoping that he's going to put up a Stephon Diggs type season. You're drafting him in the hopes that he's going to give you 30 to 35 points per week every single week and just break fantasy football altogether. Jeff, what do you have to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to lose my Bills fandom card, but I think that Victoria touched on it. Better quarterback. It doesn't matter at this level. I think that it's one of those things you feel like you're splitting hairs between the two quarterbacks. And so, yes, maybe, but I mean, Burrow might be a better quarterback at getting the ball to his receivers, especially, God forbid, vertically. It doesn't seem like the Bills have used the verticality in Allen's arm as much as you'd like to see. It really just comes down to the ceiling outcome for Jamar Chase breaks fantasy leagues, and it threatens given his efficiency, if volume comes along with it, could have the best wide receiver season in fantasy football history within his range of outcomes. Whereas Stephon Diggs, it's more that little mid wide receiver one kind of outcome. Now I'm going to get my Bills fandom card back though, because when the Bills are 13-0 and they're cruising towards the end, are you really going to see that usage in your fantasy playoffs from Stephon Diggs? And, part of me does wonder if things are rolling along for the Bills season. Yeah, they paid Stephon Diggs. They gave him that money. At the same time, they're going into they're playing for the Super Bowl. And I guess the Bengals are in some sense too, but they're going to be pushed more in their division, I expect, than the Bills are going to be pushed. I think the Bills are going to want to see what Gabe Davis has to bring. And I think that a lot of people are expecting him to just kind of be this vertical wide receiver. I expect they're going to use him in different areas of the field. And they're going to see, can he be that true wide receiver 2 in this offense? Or are we going to need to go out and either draft a player early or spend free agency money to bring that player in there that can allow Gabe Davis to be in that more just vertical role? Isaiah McKenzie has been the talk of camp, and I don't know that he's going to take over long-term the slot role, but that's going to be an open question on the Bills. And I think that they're going to try to see a little bit more on what Gabe Davis has. And so, yeah, he's not T. Higgins, but he might not be wildly different than the usage that T. Higgins sees. And so that's kind of where I land on those. It's just, you guys hit it both home. It's just a ceiling outcome is Jamar Chase is the best wide receiver in fantasy football.
Absolutely. Now we're going to hit one more question, and then we are going to go to the chat. So, we've been really diving deep into these questions today. We might not get to all of the chat questions, but we will do our best. But the last question comes in from our friend Jay Wall, who we also had the pleasure of meeting this weekend in Canton. Fantastic guy who was wearing a cutoff Randy Moss jersey in the flag football tournament and really, earned it. He made some fantastic contested catches. Really fun to watch Jay Wall out there. But his question is, why is Adam Thielen being so undervalued? He's consistently a top 12 wide receiver in points per game, and he's getting a new pass-heavy coaching staff. Make it make sense. I'll let you guys answer this because I got to be honest, I don't have a firm take on Adam Thielen. You can see it going either way. Either, you like the age cliff could come and he could fall off the age cliff and be terrible, and that's kind of baked into his ADP, or he can do what he's done the last 3 years and defy father time and defied, the odds of touchdown regression and keep putting up numbers. So I don't have a strong take on Adam Thielen. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say. Jeff, to start us off here, what do you have to say about Thielen?
Well, I think you kind of hit on it right there at the end, talking about that we don't really know what to expect. It could be the age cliff. You could just be done with Adam Thielen, or he could be what we've come to know and expect. I know KJ Osborne has kind of been a camp talk, and they've talked about other receivers in camp too. And so if we see any fall off at all, this could be an offense that really just funnels through Justin Jefferson and then auxiliary pieces. And so that's really the concern. It's also that thing on, who are you moving down? If you want to move Adam Thielen way up in your rankings, who are you moving down? Because right now there is a glut of wide receiver 2s. And I think that you talk about the downside, talk about that age cliff, talk about potential usage going in other directions. He might have the lowest floor out of any of those receivers that are in that big glut of wide receivers landing in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 range, because we know he does not have his team's wide receiver 1 within his realistic range of outcomes outside of injury. And so you're stepping into that. You're getting the wide receiver 2 on a team. You're getting the Kirk Cousins wide receiver 2. It's just one of those that I think that there are plenty of reasons to fade him, and it's just very hard to move him above the players that are sitting above him.
You're on mute, Dave.
So that's exactly where I'm at. It's just so hard to move him up, and it's one of those. I feel like people ask these questions all the time. How is this guy not in the top 5? How is this guy not in the top 20? And it's really easy to ask that, but when you actually have to sit down and do rankings, like Tyler Lockett's a guy right now, and you look at his ADP, he's getting drafted in the late 30s, then it sounds like, oh my gosh, that's abhorrent. How is he possibly getting drafted that far? And then you start looking at the names above him, and you say, oh well, that's why, because I can't move Tyler Lockett ahead of these 30 people in front of him. But Victoria, what do you have to add about Adam Thielen? Do you think that is he getting drafted where he should be, or do you think he should be a little bit higher?
No, I think Jeff hit the nail on the head with that answer. All of those reasons are completely valid and accurate. I'm with you too in terms of where are you going to move him? He's going right now in Footballguys ADP. He's wide receiver 30. The guys right before him are Juju, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Gabe Davis, Darnell Mooney, Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin. I don't see a piece where you're moving him ahead of any of those guys, right? I think I can go on the opposite side of Jeff's take and just arguing the 4 reasons for him. The last 2 years we've said, dude's going to have insane touchdown regression. He was propped up by all his touchdowns the year before. He did it again last year. So the question is, can he do it again for the 3rd time that we've been arguing for, right? He isn't as sexy of a name as I don't actually know if he's ever been a sexy name to draft. But I guess he's just, again, that age clip. He's just not, you don't draft Adam Thielen as your wide receiver 2 this year and you're like, yeah, I like looking at that in my lineup. You kind of like, I'm a little nervous there, right? But I mean, your second argument you could talk about is just the new OC. And if the reports are correct and all we keep seeing is that they're going to be a pass heavy team, love that for Justin Jefferson. You got to love that for Adam Thielen as well. I think that if they, KJ Osborne's a nice late round pick there as well. But I think if they had any doubt in their mind, the Vikings as a management, that they would have brought in someone else too. If Adam Thielen was going to just fall off this cliff this year insanely for their team, I think they would have brought someone else in. Now, I don't know if I'd take him over the guys going in this range, just because you guys already hit on this. He doesn't have that wide receiver 1 for his team in his range of outcomes, and some of these guys that go right after him do, in my opinion. So yeah, it's just kind of a iffy spot there to take him.
Yeah, I agree. I think we are all in agreement on this one. Now, let's go ahead. We got a few questions in the chat, and we are running really low on time here. So let's kind of rapid fire through these. But the first question comes in from Eric White on Facebook. And Eric is saying, with all the hype surrounding Dameon Pierce, what round are you currently targeting him in a 12-team full PPR redraft league? Jeff, I'll pull this down so we're not covering up your face here. But where are you targeting Dameon Pierce at his current ADP? Or not at his ADP, just where are you targeting him in general?
I'm probably a little bit lower on Dameon Pierce than the excitement. I just think that you're going to see all 3 backs get usage, and the Texans are another offense that I'm not really fully ready to buy in on, despite the excitement around Dameon Pierce. So probably would say maybe the 11th round, where I'm kind of stepping in on him being my like back end running back 3, running back 4, and I'm really hoping that things break in that direction. He's just one of these guys. I think that I do think he's going to lead the backfield, but I think that you're going to see the other guys get usage.
And that's where he's getting drafted right now, is in the 11th round. But at footballguys.com/ADP, where you can check all of this, he has jumped up 8 spots in the last few days. I mean, he is really climbing up after that preseason showing. So, Victoria, are you reaching for him any earlier than the 10th or 11th round, or is that about where you've got him as well?
No, I don't think so. I think that's right in the money spot. And he's going around other guys like James Cook, Melvin Gordon, James Robinson, Darrell Henderson, Alexander Madison. Most of those guys are bench stashes for you're hoping you could potentially have to slot them in due to injury, whereas Dameon Pierce to me is a stash for upside. But you got to note that last season the Houston running backs, I mean, they didn't have boom weeks. The best finish was Rex Burkhead, was getting 7 points per game. That was his average. So just the timeshare was killer. They were a bad team, but if Pierce can carve out his own 3-down role, then he may be a steal there.
Yep. Agree with that. Yes, the ghost of David Johnson didn't do much in Houston last year. Next question comes in, though, from Bougie, asking us any team defenses or special teams that you have circled going into 2022. I mean, right now, just looking at the top 5, I'll rattle these off. According to Footballguys ADP, we got the Buffalo Bills, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Los Angeles Rams, San Francisco 49ers, Indianapolis Colts, the people that you'd expect to be there. Are there any other teams maybe a little bit further down the list that you're considering at ADP? The one I'll start, I see you guys both taking a look. Los Angeles Chargers, they jump out to me right now. They're getting drafted as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The defense 10 overall. So I kind of like him at that value. I mean, just loaded with playmakers. Really flew under the radar because it was so easy early in the preseason. But this is already a very good defense that just added Khalil Mack, arguably one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Autograph picture right over here, Khalil Mack. But yeah, really excited to see what he can do opposite Joey Bosa. I mean, that is just going to be a nightmare for quarterbacks. Who are some defenses that you guys are looking at?
I like the Broncos. They open with Seattle and Houston for the first 2 games. I like the Colts a lot. We already mentioned them. Houston and Jacksonville, their first 2 games. And I think the Ravens are opening at the Jets and Miami. And New England after that. I like that. Just the whole AFC East there.
Yeah, the Ravens... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Man. No, I was going to say the Ravens were on mine too, that opening. And I think people forget how hurt they were last year. And they've got pieces there. And then the Browns opening up with the Panthers. I think the Browns merit mention with Myles Garrett, with the other pieces that they have there. I think that they're going to be angry in that revenge game against Baker Mayfield because it sounds like he was not the most popular guy in that locker room.
Yeah, agree with that. And then the last question, we will wrap up on this one. Zudat saying, talk to me about wide receiver outlook. Kadarius Toney, please and thanks. I'm not sure how you guys feel about Kadarius Toney, but I am loving him this year. There were some concerns that Wandale Robinson was drafted to replace Kadarius Toney, and because of that, I think that people are just really sleeping on him. Kadarius Toney early in the offseason and in dynasty communities was everybody's favorite sleeper because of his juke rate last year and his yards per target, yards per route run, all these advanced metrics that really get you excited. And I mean, also just the eye test. I mean, he had that one play against Dallas where he basically juked out the entire defense. I mean, this guy's electric with the ball in his hand, and I think that that's what people are excited about. But Jeff, Vic, how are you guys feeling about Toney?
I like him. I think that the injury concerns, him staying on the field last season was a problem a little bit, and then the Daniel Jones concern, I think both of those are baked into his ADP already right now. I love where he's going, wide receiver 44 overall. He's going around Robert Woods, Tyler Lockett, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, Chase Claypool, Sky Moore, Russell Gage. I'd take his upside there over all
it's
those
just the
guys,
upside
probably.
Tier right there. All of those guys you're praying to hit.
Yeah,
I'm completely out on Kenny Golladay, so you eliminate him from there. And Wandale Robinson, I'm just very curious what he's really going to give you as a rookie. So kind of by process of elimination, I'm in on Kadarius Toney. I don't find myself drafting him very often because it's just kind of in that tier. I just worry about stepping into that Giants offense a little bit, I think. But I do like his upside, his ceiling, his potential.
And that's what you're swinging for with Kadarius Toney. You're not drafting him hoping, hey, maybe he can give me a few points a week and start as my wide receiver 3. You're hoping this guy hits and becomes a bona fide wide receiver 1. I mean, shades of Odell Beckham Jr. in that blue. I'll just go out and say it. That's kind of what I saw last year. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Jeff, for stepping in very last minute and stepping in on this show. You can find Jeff on Twitter at @ForWhomJBellTolls. You can find Victoria at @FFB_Victoria. And you can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. Drop us a follow, shoot us a DM, ask us any questions. You can submit your questions to mailbag@footballguys.com. You can add us on Twitter. However you can get a hold of us, if you send us a good question, we will feature it on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys, and we will see you next week. Oops.